Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special. It is the Extra Shift Pitch It. So this is something a little bit different. Obviously, no Brendan on this tonight. It's just me, and obviously, I expect this will probably be watched more on delay or afters than live. But we're going live to try something a little bit different. Now, one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the last few weeks on the podcast is we've talked a lot about this idea of free agent signings and trades. And obviously that's where we're hitting that part of the year now. We're hitting that time where trades are a thing and everyone's going to get excited about who they're going to trade. Obviously, the big conversation that is out there is Mitch Marner. Right? Mitch Marner has been the big one at the moment in terms of, will Mitch Marner be traded? Is he the likely one to leave Toronto? There are a number of players we're going to have involved in this series across the next few weeks. We're going to do, for example, we're going to look at free agent destinations for a couple of players and a couple of other big possible trade potential ideas as well in the lead up to the draft and after the draft as well. But in terms of what we're going to do today, one of the things we've heard a lot is a lot of people trying to work out what Mitch Marner's value is. And I thought it would be a fun little exercise. And I've had a few good responses from this too. I've had people messaging me directly. I asked people to go on to Cap Friendly and I asked people to submit trades that they thought were viable for Mitch Marner. I also had a bunch of people just send me through text messages suggesting potential ideas and potential things that they thought the move might possibly be. But we've had a few really interesting ones. What I can tell you, and we'll look at this in a minute, is the value in a Marner trade is really tough to identify. And the reason it's tough to identify the value in a Marner trade, and we'll come to this in a moment, but the reason it's so tough to identify a Marner trade and what its value might possibly be is nobody values Mitch Marner the exact same way. Like nobody values Mitch Marner the same way. Some people I spoke to said that they believe that Mitch Marner is incredibly undervalued as a player and Toronto will regret it. Other people that I spoke to said that he's the most overrated player they've ever heard of and that there was absolutely no point. So, it's just a really weird dichotomy of a trade. So we're going to get into it. So let's have a look at Pitch It, Episode 1, Mitch Marner. So what we're going to have a look at is the key issues in a Mitch Marner trade. So you don't need to see my face for it. Now, as I started off with here, winning a Marner trade is a broad, undefined statement. What you're going to hear a lot of from people is you're going to hear a lot of people try to tell you it's about winning the Marner trade or losing the Marner trade. What does that mean? Nobody has a definitive statement as to what winning a Marner trade means, basically. So we'll just try to readjust that. There we go. It's better. So no one has had any idea what winning a Marner trade looks like because it depends on what your view is. So do you view Mitch Marner as being highly valued? Do you value Mitch Marner as being low value? What do the Leafs have to get back for you to think that it's a valuable trade? So the conversation is, for example, need versus trade capital. In terms of, first of all, what the Leafs feel they need to get back for Marner. But secondly, what assets teams have that the Leafs actually would take. So my big example there, I think it must have been 45 minutes trying to make a Penguins-Leafs trade work. Because I'm like, the Penguins would definitely take Marner. Kyle would take Mitch in a heartbeat. It is almost impossible to make a Marner trade to Pittsburgh work. And the main reason it is basically impossible to do that is they just don't have the assets. Like if you look at the Penguins, the Penguins can't make a Marner trade without having a third party involved. And even then, the one that I did I haven't included it in this, but the trade that I made for Marner involving a third party and the Penguins, It felt like the Penguins gave almost nothing up because they had nothing to give up. Everybody else gave pieces up. They didn't. It's also about being realistic. He's got a waive. So he has to waive his no move clause. And players coming back have to do the same. Like San Jose and Anaheim have the resources to be able to make a trade. He's not waiving to go to San Jose, and it's highly unlikely he's waiving to go to Anaheim. And, while those players would waive in a heartbeat, if you look at some of the other teams, for example, if you go, oh, well, I want this superstar for that superstar, they're probably not waiving to go to Toronto, especially looking at what Toronto has and the way that the media and everything integrates there. So that makes it harder. The other thing that makes it really hard is Utah owns all the picks. Like, Utah has so many picks. So it's very hard to make trades when, like, one team has all of the picks. It makes it very difficult to find some grounds. And the key point I've put down there is while everyone loves to dump on Marner, he is a whipping boy. And look, sometimes with good reason, he puts himself out there a bit for that. He is an elite player. And sorting the trade is hard because it's popular to say he's overrated, but I will guarantee you that everybody who says that Mitch Marner is overrated will also tell you that Mitch Marner, whoever trades for Mitch Marner, fleeced the Leafs. That's what you're going to end up hearing. So I think one of the things you're going to find out is that everybody who thinks that any Marner trade is going to be overpriced and overvalued will be the same people who will then tell you the Leafs got fleeced. It's a really hard trade to win. Very hard trade to win. So the brief was suggest a realistic Mitch Marner trade using Cap Friendly's trade machine. There were allowances made. Lower cap limits don't count at this point in time for me because Utah makes it impossible. They don't come anywhere near the lower cap floor because they've already started to put zero on the contracts that are expiring. So didn't really care about the lower cap limit, didn't really care about the roster size, because if you do care about the roster size, you couldn't use Utah in anything. It's impossible. How you chose to view need was completely up to you. Now, an example that I found off Cap Friendly was this one. I went through on Cap Friendly, and I'll show you this one a bit close up. So I went through on Cap Friendly, and I found this one as an example, and then went through the comments on Cap Friendly to find out how people viewed it. So this one is Mitch Marner to Seattle for Jordan Eberle, Vince Dunn, Eli Toivonen, a 2024 second, a 2024 second, and a 2025 third. What I found in the comments on this was absolutely fascinating to me. The comments on Cap Friendly basically fell into two distinctive camps. The first one, the Leafs don't want Eberle, but overall, this seems like a decent trade, but probably it wouldn't include Jordan Eberle in that. I'd look for someone else. The other one is no way you're giving up that much for Mitch Marner. What is this, the NBA? And literally it was, is this becoming an NBA where you all trade everything for one superstar? Which is weird. What it proves is a Marner trade is a problem because at the same time, he manages to be undervalued and overvalued. And I don't know how a player can be both under and overvalued at the same time. Marner is that player. So it's a massive question. Also, that point about, what is the NBA where you just trade for superstars? I mean, most leagues, teams try to trade for superstars. Alan Walsh put out a post today, and I mean, obviously it's in his interest as an agent, but Alan Walsh put out a post today where he basically talked about the fact that the top paid players 20 years ago are on roughly the same amount of money. Like the league hasn't really taken off in terms of the amount of money that top players get. We've talked a lot about this. Brendan and myself have talked a lot about this. But how a player has managed to be worth both too much and not enough in the same trade is really interesting to me. And it's a problem. It took forever to put together some of the trades. I know that people who put together trades and sent them in said this was really hard. I know a lot of people were like, I couldn't make the money work. I really worked hard at it, but couldn't manage to make money work. Couldn't manage to find enough to go back. That was another question. Some people were like, one person messaged me and said, I couldn't find anything I really thought that Toronto should get back in return because I thought it was overvalued. So yeah, I'm really interested. So this is the first one, Leafs Kings. So this is the Leafs Kings one, the first one that I put together, which was Phillip Danault, Vladislav Gavrikov, and a 2025 second round pick for Morgan Riley and Mitch Marner. And I'm already waiting for it. Oh, that's overvalued. You've traded too much. And it'll be either side will tell me this. Now, the reason I looked at this one, it's the all change mantra for Toronto. And it gives what is a Kings team which feels like it's nearly finished the rebuild, the key piece in Mitch Marner, and an experienced key good piece in Morgan Riley. I don't think anyone argues that Morgan Riley's a bad defenseman. I think most people would argue that Morgan Riley's not your one. And I think that's the big difference there. Now, the reason I put this move together is Phillip Danault gives stability and options down the middle, brilliant on the penalty kill, gives them a lot of security and stability down that middle. They did try to land him when he was at the Habs. They did try that. Gavrikov changes up that right side one slot and also is looking at like future. The moving of Riley also means that you get $7 million in cap. And this is the other big thing for Toronto in any of these trades, is that you get cap back, and that's what you're after. As I also said there, it's unlikely the Kings, if you tried to make an individual move for Gavrikov or Danault, they probably wouldn't do it. But if you offered them a Marner-type player, especially in the way that the Pacific currently is, that feels like something where Vegas has loaded up a little bit on that front. Obviously, you've got McDavid, Draisaitl. The Kings are probably looking for a bit more of a spark-type player. Marner is that spark-type player. So I think that that's a move that actually makes a fair bit of sense. Now, I don't think it's going to be popular. To be honest with you, I don't think any trade that's up in this episode is going to be popular. I think there will be a lot of people that think they're not particularly great. But again, I think that this is the sort of thing which gives the Leafs depth. It also gives them cap. So there's two benefits in this trade. The second one was a 1-for-1. Leafs and Sabres. Now this, I've already included in this. Both fan bases in this one, and I asked a Toronto fan friend of mine about this one. He thought Toronto was being fleeced. I spoke to somebody I know who isn't a Sabres fan. It's very hard to find Sabres fans. Sorry, Sabres fans, if you're out there. But they're fond of the Sabres, and they were like, "Oh, feels like they're getting way too little back for Owen Power." So if both sides think they're getting fleeced, does that make it fair? So Owen Power is the coming defenseman, 8-year contract control, good money, like $8 million for, it's 8x8, solid. Buffalo's had a lot of really good coming defensemen. Obviously, you've got Rasmus Dahlin there, and that's going very well. And you're looking at Power. They've also got a few others in the pipeline as well. But the problem is that you can keep gathering those players, but Buffalo always looks good until the puck gets dropped, and then it sort of falls apart a little bit. I think if you've got a Tage Thompson, for example, and you've got a Mitch Marner, that changes. They instantly start finding goals to support Dahlin. Because here's the thing. Rasmus Dahlin is playing really well at the back. They can't manage to land enough. When Tage Thompson went down, they couldn't land enough goals. So for me, if you add in a Marner and you just outscore your problems a little bit more, it gives them a different dynamic. Because the Sabres are a real risk of being left behind completely. Even though they should be the coming force, they're never quite there. So Toronto gets long-term cap-settled right defensemen who will keep developing ideally and should. Marner gives the Sabres that big star. And my question mark for Buffalo is this. Do you keep doing the same thing over and over again? We're talking about Toronto doing the same thing over and over again and not having different results. If you're Buffalo, do you keep just going, this defensive core is brilliant and we're just going to keep moving it on and get different results, or we get same results? You're not going to get different results if you just keep running it back. So Buffalo's in a low-key position, a little bit like Toronto. And for me, I look at this and go, this is a move that I think is fair, because I think for both teams, it's that shaking them both out of the rut that they were in, moving a major piece and changing up the dynamic of what that team is. That one I feel is good. And also the Leafs get a little bit of cap space. The Leafs get a little bit of wriggle room off the back of that one. So it helps Toronto out with the cap room. This one was one of the more requested ones. I had to try to work out how the hell. Now, the problem, it's very, very small, so I will read it out. But it had to be very small because it's a very long trade. I wanted to try to get Vegas involved. I wanted to try to get Utah involved. And it was a very difficult trade to manufacture. Vegas's cap sucks. Utah doesn't have much to give back. So what we've got here is we've got a trade situation where Toronto, Mitch Marner, Samsonov is out, not because I think that he's worth trade value. That was to make the goalies work on cap friendly. So I moved Samsonov out to balance the contracts. And Nick Robertson going out. In Ishai Theodore and Karel Vejmelka, a 2024 second-round pick and a 2024 third-round pick. So the idea of doing that is you get the picks. So the picks is something you can then build up. You've got Vejmelka, so you've got a goalie, and you've got that top-line defenseman.
How are you going to do that, Hockey?
Thank you for the addition. Live edition there by my wife, rather than her normal typed edition. So Shea Theodore's your top defenseman, Karel Vejmelka, goalie coming in. The Leafs get that. Vegas gets Matthias Maselli from Utah, who is outstanding as a young talent. If you've listened to any of the podcasts with Leah Merrill, for example, Matthias Maselli is one of those players that they were very high on, obviously, before the move out. They also get Nick Robertson. So the part of the reason for that is for Vegas is they get good offense, cheap offense that is young and can move forward. So it's a bit of future planning. It's a bit of cap relief, but still they're getting quality. Got Zach Whitecloud going out as well. That's largely as well to make sure that Utah needs to get something out of this, extra out of this as well. I've also got Vegas giving one of their picks out as well. Now, Utah gets Mitch Marner, Ilya Samsonov, just to make the goalie contracts balance. Zach Whitecloud, so giving them extra defense. And they get the 2025 third-round pick. I mean, it's not like they really need extra picks because they're Utah and they own all the picks, but just to sort of make that one a bit friendlier. Now, Utah gets the star thereafter and in their first year in Utah, as well as Zach Whitecloud for depth. Toronto gets their top defenseman and a goalie. Vegas gets cheap upside offensive talent that gives them some cap relief and makes them a little bit more flexible in their cap to be able to do other things. I kind of really like this one. This one I think is a bit chaotic, but I kind of like it because I think that it gives everybody exactly what they need. But a lot of people, I think, will look at that and go, not really, don't know about that. But I think, again, in any of these trades, I think that's going to be the hard part. For me, the other thing here for Toronto's benefit as well, I think Toronto definitely wins out in this one with Theodore Vejmelka and the two picks. They also get cap. Again, there's cap space coming back there. They get about $4 million in cap. So I think that works really well for Toronto. I think everyone wins out of that one. Not as much as the next one. Now, we're talking a lot about this idea that Toronto needs to get top-line experienced defense. So what I did was I just threw together this small trade, which was Mitch Marner for Marc-Edouard Vlasic, 1-for-1. Who says no? They're getting a Stanley Cup final first pairing D-man for $6.9 million. That is a bargain. And anyone who's ever watched the podcast will know that my long-held aim in life is to trade Marc-Edouard Vlasic to somebody. I don't care who. This is obviously not a real one. But I just had to throw this one in there because if I didn't try to move Marc-Edouard Vlasic for Mitch Marner 1-for-1, people would be a bit disappointed that I didn't do that. So, but Mitch Marner, market again, he's a first line Stanley Cup final pairing D-man. Plays on the right, 6.9 mil. I mean, do it, Brad. It's not happening. Anyway, this one came in via phone. So this was another Utah one. Marner for Lawson Krause, 2025 first and a 2025 second. Toronto gets their own pick back there. I thought this was an interesting one. Good player, fills a need, reasonable deal. The Leafs get some cap space back as well. The picks help replenish the cupboard for Toronto, who don't have anything. One of the things I noticed when I was trying to do Toronto moves, very hard to do Toronto moves in this climate because there's no picks to send back. And it's really interesting. If you look at all of the major contenders, nobody's got picks. Utah's got most of them, but nobody's got picks. Boston doesn't have picks left. Toronto doesn't have picks left. Vegas definitely has no picks left. Everybody who is a contender emptied the cupboard of picks. So there's no draft moves to be made there, really. So what to make of this? I had a couple of other people, just sort of vague conversations that I had with people. One person said their move that they came up with was Shibrakov, Shifley, 6 Krispy Kremes, 1 free coffee at Tim Hortons, and a 2025 first for Mitch Marner. They know who they are. I'm not going to out them. But the conversation, which I kind of agreed with, though, was I don't mind Marner, but not at that cap hit. Basically, the idea is that he's not bad. I don't think he's bad. I just don't think he's the guy that gets you a cup. And that's a view that's out there from a lot of people. There's a lot of people going, well, he's the extra piece. But a team that only needs an extra piece can't afford Mitch Marner. I think it's a really tricky spot that everyone finds themselves in. Because how do you do this? Like, how do you find who is the right fit? I wanted to move him to Colorado, making a Colorado trade nearly impossible. I thought about the Islanders, and I tried to convince myself that Ilya Sorotkin's going to bounce back and that $8 million to be worth it. Couldn't do it. Someone's going to be very creative. I looked at Detroit. It's very hard to find pieces you can move. I know Brendan was talking before about the fact that he was trying to make an LA trade work with Drew Doughty plus, but the plus was a question mark. What do you do with that? The other thing is, what will Toronto want back? Because you can't really give them pure prospects, because then that stretches the window out in terms of they're not ready yet. But you're not going to get the finished article for what they want. So it's a really weird situation for Toronto. They can't really trade Marner for win-now pieces. But you also don't want to trade Marner for futures and then basically ruin the rest of your roster, because if you trade Marner away completely for futures, what are you doing there? Have you blown a chance? It's a tricky, tricky trade to make. So my overall thought is literally not to cop out on it. It won't be successful. Regardless of what the trade is, initially, it will fail. It doesn't matter who they trade for them. It will be not successful. In the past few days, again, I've spoken to people who think he's deeply undervalued and also way overvalued all at the same time. The value for me with Marner being moved has nothing to do with Mitch Marner, the player. I don't think there's actually a problem with Mitch Marner, the player. I think Mitch Marner, the player, with the rest of the other big four is a problem because you don't have enough cap to creatively fill the rest of your roster holes. Don't think the problem is the player. I think the problem is the cap fit. You've got to make a move. I don't think you wouldn't move Matthews. I don't think you'd move Nylander. He's been consistent. Marner's been consistent too, but you just also get the feeling his is the next contract up. That negotiation is going to be terrible. He wants a lot of money. I don't think Toronto are going to give him that money. So you don't want to lose him for nothing. You're not going to lose Tavares. In fact, I think they're going to extend Tavares on a much, 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 much lower deal. So I think the Marner has to be the piece. The value in the Mana trade is cap. It's got nothing to do with the player. It's cap. If you can put together enough cap space to bring in a top pairing defenseman, a goalie, and a little bit more depth, you're halfway to where you need to be if you're Toronto. So I don't think this move is going to be successful for Toronto. I think it fails. But I think it's a failure that's a failure initially and down the line will prove to be a bit more successful. For the other team, it's completely, and this is the thing too, when we talk about a successful failure, there's more than one team involved in this. For the other team, it's about bringing him in and you need to convince him to sign long-term with you. Right? He's going to get, I said 100%, I mean 100 points. He's going to get 100 points. Mitch Marner consistently is around the 100-point mark. So you've got a 100-point player coming in. You tell me a team that's going to turn down a 100-point player. They're not. You got to convince him to sign long-term. But you can bring him in. I also think he'll be absolutely successful. I don't think there'll be a problem. I think Marner will succeed wherever he goes. The pressure in this move is not on Mitch Marner. The pressure is on Brad Treliving to find the pieces to ensure that giving up on Mitch Marner wasn't the mistake. That's the hard part here. So I think, for me, sort of in summing this first pitch it up, and I want to hear comments afterwards, please in the comments on either Twitter or YouTube or the Facebook, put what trades you just put out for Mitch Marner. What do you think that the issues are with making a Marner move? Is he undervalued? Is he overvalued? Tell us what you think of that, because we'll revisit that in the next one. The next one's likely to be a Steven Stamkos free agent move, by the way, as well. So that's the next one we're looking at. But with the Mitch Marner deal, I feel like there's a very narrow field of teams. And I feel like it's not quite the absolute top contenders and it's not the bottom feeders. I think it's a very narrow window. And in that narrow window, you have to find somebody that has the resources to send back to you. And Mitch Marner's going to waive to go there. I think there's the two questions. I think he'll waive to get out of Toronto. I don't think he's waiving for every team. I don't think if Columbus came in with an offer, I don't think Mitch Marner's waiving to go to Columbus. It doesn't feel like it. So it's very difficult. Who do you think should make the move? What do you think they should offer up? What should Toronto be looking for as fair trade? They're the questions that I want to leave you with. Do you think your team should be involved with Mitch Marner, or do you think your team should stay well and truly away? Is there anybody out there who wants Marner? Because this is the other thing I said. A lot of people I spoke to, and I don't particularly want him, but I think he'll be good. Is there anyone out there who wants their team to trade for Mitch Marner? That's another question I think we should all ask. So I'm going to leave this here. It's only a brief one. Thank you very much if you watch this on catch up or seen it live. Either way, thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate the feedback. We get a lot of people watching after the fact, and it really sort of helps out a lot with the numbers and stuff like that. I get a lot of comments as well. So feel free to comment on the videos. Let us know what you think. Give us your feedback, and we will catch you all later.